I've got such sweaty palms after listening to that presentation, and now I'm thinking about tax. Do I pay the right tax? Do I pay pension? What do you pay? As it's what? Oh, yeah, I'm shutting up. Like, so I don't have any words on my slides anyway, so I can keep talking and try and remember them. So my name is Tom, and I am going to talk today about growing your game using experimentation. So I set up a company about 6 months ago with a couple of former colleagues, and now colleagues recycled, called the Experimentation Group. And I'm going to talk to you about all the stuff that we learned if you want to start experimenting on your game. So number one, who are we? That's what I just said. We are the Experimentation Group, and we do experiments, and we help studios of all sizes and types to kind of adapt and put experimentation to their game. This all came about when I worked at King with one of my co-founders called David, who had the idea to set up this team, or had the hypothesis that we could make more money for the company by optimizing the games that we already had in our portfolio than building a new game. And we showed that many times over, kind of, I guess, like coming up with features like hard level labeling, piggy bank, and episode race, which are kind of like common practice in mobile games now, and came about by using this technique. So there we all are. On the right hand side, that's David. So it was his kind of like brainchild to set up the Experimentation Group, and he built and led that. As me in the middle, I just like did work, and then on the hang on, it's your right hand side, my left hand side, your right hand side is Philip Black, who you may have heard on the Deconstruct of Fun podcasts. So he's a game economist and he's also like a data nerd scientist, and is fully on board with the mission to try and like use science to improve the way we make games. So yeah, together we're on this mission. And these are the things that we've learned to date, which I'm going to share with you over the slides coming up. So there's three kind of principles that I think are kind of key, the most important if this is something that you're interested in trying. So number one is to operate within a structure, number two, balance data and creativity, and number three, move fast. And this is why I tried to keep the words of the slide, because you could all read that and I said it at the same time, so it's kind of pointless. But the pitfall is now I can't remember anything I've written, and so we'll see how good my brain is. So yes, we will start with the first point. So I guess hang on, I've gone forward. So in terms of operating within a structure, the point of this kind of principle is that experimentation randomly is kind of pointless, right? You're just shooting in the dark. If you're just doing a test to do a test, or testing the first thing that comes to your head, you're not going to get anywhere, because you're basically just kind of like thrashing around in the void, and it's unlikely that you're actually going to hit your target and be able to capitalize on it. And so the point is that you have to be really clear in your mind that what is it we're trying to achieve, and there are two parts to that, and the first one is what is the metric we're trying to shift. So I would imagine for most people it's more money, because then you get to expand your studio, hire more people, do more cool things, maybe make some more games. But I guess the first stage of that is to kind of get to something which is more directly achievable. If you just say money, how are you going to do that directly? You have to kind of sink down to a level which you can affect with your experiment. And so the next point of this is about being careful with what you choose, because you could pick something like ARPU, right? Like average revenue per user. That feels nice. It would be great if all my users all spent a bit more money. However, the kind of risk with this is that a way you could achieve that is by putting out your game aggressively, and now everybody's monetized, so your ARPU is way up. But also people hate ads, and so maybe a bunch of people leave, and so your retention is way down. And so you've kind of met your goal, you've met your target, you've increased ARPU, but you've kind of crashed your game at the same time. Which isn't necessarily to say that ARPU is wrong, it's just to make the point that in picking your target, you have to carefully consider like both sides of it. what could be the impact. So what we found to date with everybody we work with is that early retention is normally a good target. Almost every studio we've worked with has had pretty kind of like middling to poor D1 to D3. So the proportion of users stick around at day 1 and day 3 for installs. And so that has a bunch of benefits. So number one is it's obviously right at the top of your game. So you've got the most amount of players there. Number two, it's also being at the top of the game. You get those players through the treatment like super early. If you launch something today, you'll get new installs to see it the next day. And so you get a result fast. You can learn quickly. Also, it's kind of like relatively low risk. You'd much rather experiment and do something that could backfire and go wrong with a player that's just entered the game rather than someone who's been there for 6 months and like loves it. You really don't want to mess those people around. So that's sure there's another point. I just can't remember what it is. So that's a good place where you spend it. Oh yeah, that was the other thing. Is that quite often the things that we've been doing is taking stuff out rather than putting stuff in. Quite often the first like day or two, the first few sessions are like super cluttered with stuff. It's almost like to increase retention, we're going to put more stuff in and more stuff in and more stuff in, and to the point where it becomes really confusing as a player. Like, what are you asking me to do? What is the experience here? And so it's actually quite often it's quite an easy thing to fix, like fast, because you're taking stuff out rather than putting stuff in. So you can turn this around really quickly, which is nice. The second thing around structure is having a really clear hypothesis. So why do you think the thing that you're going to try is going to work? Like, why do you think your players are going to react to that? And this is really important for a couple of reasons. Like, number one, if you're right, then you will see that quickly. Like, if the thing you're trying really matters to your players, they'll react to it quickly and they'll start to play more, and you've got the answer that you want. Amazing. But if you're wrong, it's also good news, because perhaps counterintuitively, what you've done is move a massive blocker out of your way. Like, if you think something is true and you're making decisions based on that, and it's not true, then you're going to get stuck. And so if you can prove to yourself, if you can build that understanding of actually this thing that which we're holding as a truth is not true, and get it out of your way, then you're going to progress much faster. And so, two reasons to start with this biggest hypothesis. The next principle is balancing data and creativity. So there's obviously two sides to this, right? Like, you can be super data led, and the problem with being super data led is that studios tend to get more and more kind of incremental and inwardly focused, and new features tend to be variations on a theme rather than something radically new. And it's really difficult, given that they're kind of, I guess, the basis on which people normally undertake experimentation is, I've got a game and I want it to grow much more quickly than it is. If you want to have that kind of hockey stick, you need to be more radical than being like fully data led is going to allow you to do. On the other side of things, if you ignore the data and you're fully kind of like creative, then that tends to have the opposite effect, in that it's kind of like we were saying at the top of the presentation. If you're just allowing your mind to roam free across the universe of ideas, then it's unlikely that you're going to get a winner, because the idea has to be within the frame of your players. Like, your players, it has to be something that matters to your players to be something that's going to have an effect. And so the point is that you need to have a bit of both, right? You need to have that creativity, and you need to allow yourself and your team to kind of be inspired by things like the next slide. Yeah, be inspired by other apps, other games, real world experiences, experiments they've read about, YouTube videos they've seen, whatever, but that has to be couched in a data point. And so a really easy way to achieve this is to take your hypothesis, like, if A, then B. If we put a competitive event in this game, then players will play for longer each session, and then add a because C to it. Because we saw when we did this before, the players loved it. Yeah, so you can take that, like maybe a wacky idea. If we paint everything blue, then people will play more, because we saw when we did something blue before, people loved it. It's all great. So actually, it could be quite simple. And then the final thing is to move fast. So this is the kind of biggest differentiator between teams that have had success with experimentation and those that haven't, in our experience. Because when you've invested a bunch of time, so it takes you a month to get your first experiment out, and then you wait 2 weeks to get that data back because you put loads of different cells in there, and you only put 10% in each, and blah, blah, blah. And then the result comes back flat or not clear. It's really demotivating, and you kind of see like the reaction of the team is like, damn, why have we spent, like, I had so much stuff to do and we just done this, spent 6 weeks on it and got nothing back. Like, what a waste of time. So the antidote to that is to move fast, to try and get something out within like 2 weeks, as quickly as possible. If you can ship that experiment in 2 weeks and get the data back within a week, then you've already kind of doubled the speed at which you're learning versus the other approach, right? And what that does is it reduces the risk. So you're less likely to get to the point where you feel like you've invested a whole bunch of time but got nothing back. Like, if you can get a result back in 3 weeks, even if it's flat, then the feeling of kind of disappointment is lessened, and you get another chance to go again and get that momentum up. Because the reality is that you're not going to get it right first time. It's an incremental process where you test something, and this is where it's really good to test your biggest hypothesis, right? Because if you test the thing which you think is going to matter, and it does matter, then that's incredibly exciting as a team. But if it doesn't matter, then, oh boy, we need to rethink again. And it's actually that moment which we seem to be like super exciting for a bunch of teams, because they've got a thing to rally around, like as a group. Suddenly kind of like democratizes the discussion amongst the team, where they can all look at that one data point and say, you know, we thought this was true, but actually we've learned this. What does that mean? What do we do next? And it's fun, like it's super exciting. And if you can get that thing, the next thing out the door in 2 weeks and see what happens, like, tonight gets the excitement up. Or I enjoy it anyway. So that's it. Thank you.